Hospitals. A place where the sick are cured, the wounded healed, and the dying saved. It is also a place where new life comes into this world. One can call this a haven of healing and happiness. However, not all may think the same. For them, a hospital is a place of pain, sorrow, and death. A place where the lie, "it's nothing serious," is blatantly used. They even consider it worse than a prison, trapped in an empty room with machines attached to you, and silence, haunting you at each passing minute. As for me, I believe in the latter. After only 3 hours on my first day as an admissions clerk, I can say with surety that it is definitely not a haven. Sick and injured patients come with terrified expressions, unknowing of what they might get diagnosed with. It had only been a month since the hospital opened, and just yesterday, they put up an urgent hiring advertisement for a clerk in the night shift. The quoted salary package was handsome, so naturally, I applied. An hour later, I received a call from someone at the hospital. He wished to take the interview via call, to which I had no objections. After giving what I felt were the right answers, the person on the phone sounded pleased and offered me the position. I was told to join the very next day, which was pretty quick on their part. I assumed they must be short-staffed, as they concluded the hiring process in a matter of a few hours. That's how I ended up working here at this hospital. Looking at the structure of the hospital, one can tell it is a modern design. A small, minimalistic square-shaped building with glass windows lining each other. Though the hospital was not that huge, its simple yet clean design made it stand out from the rest of the worn-down buildings surrounding it. The ground floor was complete and operational. However, the upper floors all the way to third level were not. Construction had abruptly stopped, for some reason, which I assumed was due to lack of funds. Entering the hospital, you are greeted by the admissions desk on the center left, and an elevator across it on the far right. On either side of the admissions desk were the patients' wards. The ward door had a high-tech lock system, which only opened when it scanned a special key card given to all staff members. In the front and right side of the hospital were various rooms allocated to doctors. During busy hours, patients and doctors alike would be seen entering and exiting these rooms. The striking thing about the hospital's interior was that there were no stairs that connected to the upper floors. The elevator was the only means used to access them, and it was closed off due to the construction. This wasn't an issue, as I was told there wasn't anything in the upper floors. My shift started at 8 p.m. and after only 3 hours, I was pretty exhausted. I looked to my left and saw Mr. Rahim. My fellow clerks as well as my superior was doing just fine. Interacting with that many patients really drained me out. Whew, how do you stay this active and fresh after all that work? I asked Mr. Rahim as I rested my head on the desk. Well, I have been here for about a year, so I have gotten used to it, said Mr. Rahim with a smile. And besides, it's not that much work anyway, so get up. I don't want to see you lacking on your first day, huh? I groaned as I got up. Thankfully, there hadn't been any new patients for some time, so I was able to rest up a bit. A pair of nurses passed by in front of us, whispering something among themselves. They looked a bit anxious as they sat down on a couch at a distance from me. The only things I could make out from their conversation were disappeared, and I hope they find. They look a bit worried. Is everything alright with them? I asked Mr. Rahim, who too was watching the nurses. He didn't answer right away, and when I shifted my gaze towards him, I noticed that he had a troubled expression on his face. Since you work here now, I guess it is fair that you know as well, stated Mr. Rahim. No what? I asked as I cut in between what he was about to say. 2 days ago, a patient escaped the wards, and sadly, we have no idea where that patient is. Isn't it a possibility that the patient just left the building? It was a stupid question, but I couldn't help it. It is a possibility. However, the 48-year-old patient, Miss Lubna, was diagnosed with ataxia, and her condition was deteriorating quick. Not only that, but she also has acute blindness, so it is not possible for her to walk out from the building on her own. Besides, the hospital only has 2 exits, the main entrance and the back door, and the security cameras caught no footage of her leaving. The windows are also out of option as they are completely shut. What about the police? Have they been informed of this? We haven't yet. The owners of the hospital are afraid that it would lead to a bad image of the hospital. So we are simply trying to find the patient on our own. What's worse is that is not the only issue. There's more? Apparently, the clerk whose position you filled in, Mr. Cameron, has also been missing since that day. The last footage of him was entering the patient's ward. After that, him and Miss Lubna simply vanished without a trace. I tried to take this all in. It sounded comical, almost like Mr. Rahim was teasing me on my first day, but his expression remained serious throughout. Even now, there was no hint of a smile on his face. Don't wrap your head around this too much. I only told you this so that you weren't in the dark about it. For now, just focus on your work, hey? Easier said than done. How was I supposed to entirely ignore that story and focus on work? I just gave a nod and started to arrange some papers. It was now almost 12 a.m. 2 doctors, Dr. Hassan and Dr. Faizan, were idly chatting in front of me, while 3 nurses sat on the couches. Basically, all the night shift staff was killing time in the main area. I wasn't myself doing anything but aimlessly scrolling through my social media when a single ding interrupted us. The elevator panel lit up and showed that the elevator was coming down from the 3rd floor. Mr. Rahim? I thought the upper floors were empty and there was no one up there. I asked, a bit puzzled. I was told the same too, said Mr. Rahim, as he got up and made his way around in front, blocking my view. Another ding signaled that the elevator had reached the ground floor, and the doors slowly started to open. I tried to get a glimpse of who it was, but the people in front of me blocked my view. And then I heard one of the nurses scream, followed by 2 words from Mr. Rahim that sent a chill down my spine. Dear Lord. I got up from my chair and almost puked at what I saw. In the center of the elevator was a heavily mutilated corpse of what was once a person. The arms and legs had been ripped off and interchanged with one another, meaning the legs were sticking out from the arm sockets and the arms from the leg sockets. The head had been cut off clean and was planted into the chest. The inside of the elevator was covered in blood, and on the back wall was written, "Not the one," in blood. Everyone stood frozen, in shock at what they saw. Dr. Hassan was the first one to come out of shock and move towards the body. He called for someone to help him move the body, but no one moved an inch. He then motioned towards me, which brought me back to my senses. I shakily went to him and lifted the body out of the elevator. The moment we stepped out of the elevator, the doors closed behind us and the elevator powered off. What the hell just happened? And whose body is that? Shouted Dr. Faizan. Mr. Rahim and Dr. Hassan slowly examined the body. Suddenly, Mr. Rahim stopped and exclaimed, "Oh good Lord, I think this is Kamran. The face is heavily disfigured, but these were the clothes he was wearing the day he went missing." I tried to absorb all of this. The previous clerk shows up dead and his body is heavily disfigured, and what could possibly be assumed as the work of a psycho killer, which meant we now have a problem on our hands. Let's just call the police now. There could potentially be a psycho killer hiding in the upper floors, I said. Like hell we are. The owner strictly told us to solve this issue without involving any outside party. I don't want to lose my job here because of some wannabe smart-ass kid, replied Dr. Faison. Are you crazy? There is a dead body here. This is no longer a matter that we solve for ourselves. Dr. Faison was spewing nonsense. How can we stop a suspected killer ourselves? Alright, that's enough. Let's first put the body somewhere for now and clean up the blood here. We have patients in the ward, and I don't think it would be good if any one of them saw this sight. We should keep this to ourselves for the moment and see what we can do about it, said Dr. Hassan. True. It would be better for us to close off the hospital for the night as well, to prevent any more people entering the building, added Mr. Rahim. His eyes showed terror. Dr. Hassan nodded at that and turned away from everyone else. At that moment, I clearly saw the fear in his eyes. He was trying his best to stay calm, but everything that just happened was just too much to digest. Dr. Hassan faced us all again and then directed us to some tasks. After some complaining, Dr. Faison and 2 other nurses carried the dead body to the emergency room. The other nurses and Dr. Hassan went to explain the ruckus to the rest of the patients in the ward as being merely a drunkard entering the hospital. Me and Mr. Rahim went down to close the entrance. We pulled the shutters down in front of the hospital doors and turned off the lights outside. I don't know what's even going on here. First 2 people went missing here and then one of them turns up dead, muttered Mr. Rahim. I wasn't doing anything better myself. My hands were shaking violently as I secured the shutter in place. At about 1 a.m., we all gathered back in the lobby. I was the first to break the silence. What do we do now? If all goes well, we may be able to make it through the night. But then what? It would be wise to call the police, but as Dr. Faison pointed out, we shouldn't involve any outside party. We would be the prime suspects if the killer simply escapes from the room. The other issue we would face is that we weren't able to guarantee safety for our patients as Miss Lubna is still missing, responded Dr. Hassan. I started to question again, but then the lights went out. Even the backup generator didn't start. The only light now was coming from the street lights outside. Before we could react, the elevator panel once again lit up with a ding, and the elevator slowly went up to the 3rd floor. All of you, hide somewhere. Either the killer is sending down Mrs. Lubna or the person is coming down themselves, commanded Dr. Hassan. The doctors and nurses hurriedly hid in the doctor's room. Me and Mr. Rahim hid under the admissions desk. I would rather not imagine what the killer might have done to Miss Lubna's body. I tried to calm down my breathing so that I don't give myself away. After about 10 seconds, a ding sound pierced the silence, and I heard the elevator doors open. I held my breath, hoping it wasn't anything worse, but obviously, I was wrong. Following the sound of the doors opening, I heard a footstep, and then another. Whoever it was had just exited the elevator. The elevator doors then closed. The person slowly made their way towards the admissions desk. I clasped my hand over my mouth so that I didn't make any noise. I had no way of telling who it was. Was it the killer? Did that person have any weapons with them? I just didn't know. The footsteps stopped. The only thing separating us and that person was just a thin layer of wood. I then heard something smack the desk right above me. Dear, is anyone here? It was a female's voice. I turned to Mr. Rahim and he mouthed the words, Mrs. Lubna? I tried to get up, but Mr. Rahim held me down and signaled me to wait. Before I could object any further, Mr. Rahim's eyes suddenly widened. He was looking at something behind me. I slowly turned around and froze in horror. It was dark, but the light from the street lights outside was just enough to see. Miss Lubna's neck had extended 10 meters, and her head was searching behind me. From the sound of light tapping on the desk above, I could tell that her body was still standing right where it was before. I was scared. Too scared. My body refused to move. I could not believe what I was seeing.
"Where are you?"
asked Miss Lubna. It almost sounded like she was mocking us. Her head turned around and our eyes met. They were completely white, and she had a grin on her face. A second passed, then another. Her head slowly scanned both me and Mr. Rahim, and then retracted back. I heard footsteps move away from the desk.
"Where are you, dear? Is no one going to welcome me?"
I slowly let out my breath. I had no idea I was holding it in. Furthermore, I looked at my hands and saw they were shaking violently. I looked towards Mr. Rahim and saw that he was sweating.
"What is that thing?"
I whispered. My voice was trembling. Mr. Rahim just shook his head. It looked like he had just lost his voice. A door opened to the right and I heard hurried footsteps towards Mrs. Lubna.
"Hey, it's Miss Lubna. She looks all right. We should attend to her and see if she suffered any injuries."
It was Dr. Faison.
"Doctor, wait. Something's not right,"
shouted Dr. Hassan. But it was already too late.
"Dear, is that you?"
I silently glanced over the desk and saw the horror unleashed. Dr. Faison stopped just a few steps from Mrs. Lubna.
"Oh dear, you don't look right. Wait, let me fix you up,"
said Mrs. Lubna as she jumped on top of Dr. Faison.
"What are you doing, woman? Get off of me!"
shouted Dr. Faison. Then I heard a bone crack, followed by a scream. Miss Lubna ripped out Dr. Faison's right arm. Dr. Faison howled in pain as blood splattered across the floor.
Yes, yes. Let the hot nectar spill forth and bathe me in red. Let me drink the wine of thy sacrifice,
shouted Miss Lubna. I was frozen in fear yet again. My legs refused to move. Mr. Rahim was the same. His eyes were transfixed on the horror. We didn't move an inch. I couldn't see properly due to the darkness, but it looked like Miss Lubna shoved her hand straight into Mr. Faison's chest, after which he stopped moving.
Oh dear, you stopped moving? You are not the one then,
said Miss Lubna as she got up.
I did hear the presence of one other nearby. Oh, I'll make sure my playthings don't leave just yet.
With that, she raised her hands towards the sky and started chanting in an unknown language. Just as she finished, I grabbed my left hand as I felt a burning sensation in my left wrist. Mr. Rahim was also clenching his left hand. The pain subdued in a few seconds, and a red mark that resembled the mathematical division sign showed up where the pain began. Miss Lubna dragged Mr. Faison's body with one hand and held his arm in the other and headed towards the elevator.
You may not be the one, but you'll do for now.
The elevator's doors closed, and she got in, dragging Mr. Faison's body. I got one last look at her blood-smeared grin before the elevator doors closed. The elevator traveled to the third floor, after which the panel turned off, and with that, the lights in the hospital came back on.
What in the world just happened?
Questioned Mr. Rahim, Dr. Hassan also came out from the doctor's room. It seemed like he closed the door once Miss Lubna attacked Dr. Faison. I don't like using this term because it makes me sound unprofessional. But that thing was no human. It was definitely, most definitely, a demon, stated Dr. Hassan. One of the nurses came out of hiding and darted towards the hospital entrance.
I don't want to die. Please, I don't want to die,
she muttered. As soon as she grabbed the door, she screamed and then doubled over. I must have found my strength because I ran towards her, with Dr. Hassan right behind me. I looked to see what happened and saw that the nurse's left arm was completely covered in burn marks. What is just going on here? Said Dr. Hassan in a low voice. We carried the nurse back and laid her on one of the couches. Within seconds, some patients came out of the wards demanding to know about the screaming. Some were clutching their left wrists as well, which I assumed they got too, the mark. Upon seeing the blood in the lobby, they stopped. Is that blood? Asked one of them. We have a situation on our hands, stated Dr. Hassan, as he tried to hide the fear evident on his face. I looked towards the elevator, the panel blank, as if it never once turned off.